Understanding virtual machine files in Hyper-V 2016. As I discussed earlier, or as you know now, that, or you may know already, whatever the case is, as we know that there are two type of files when we create a virtual machine in Hyper-V. There are two type of files, by categorization. Virtual machine configuration files that store the configuration information, and virtual machine hard disk file that contains the actual data, right? So in this video, I would like to explain a little bit more about virtual machine configuration files, virtual machine hard disk files. When we talk about file names and functions, and we talk about virtual machine hard disk files, you may see two type of hard disk files. Some hard disk files with .vhdx extension or hard disk file with .vhd extension. If you see .vhdx extension, it means it's a generation 2 virtual machine. The virtual machine which supports a newer hardware as well as it doesn't support 32-bit OS and support newer feature of Hyper-V. If you see a virtual machine hard disk with .vhd extension, then it means it's a generation 1 virtual machine, or it belongs to generation 1 virtual machine. Same thing. Generation 1 means it supports legacy OS, including 32-bit operating system. It supports IDE controller for system drives, and doesn't support newer hardware. In VMware, we have something called VMTK, right? Virtual machine disk. In Hyper-V, we have VHDX. Just as a comparison for those people who know virtual VMware. Also, when you will start taking checkpoints or snapshots in Hyper-V, you will see some AVHDX files or AVHD files. And these files are basically snapshots files. If I take a snapshot of, let's say, Jan 2 virtual machine, I may see a AVHDX file that will have a snapshot for details for that virtual machine. As far as configuration files are concerned, XML file is no longer exist in Hyper-V 2016. Instead, we have a configuration file which stores all the configuration related data of virtual machine, and you will find this file with .vmcx extension. This is the main configuration file, and I can't emphasize this enough. Main configuration file, it replaces the XML file from the previous version. Don't try to open it under Notepad or any other editor. Okay, you may corrupt it. So VMCX file is the main configuration file that stores all the configuration. You may see one VMRS file as well. This is, you can consider it like a file that stores the runtime state data, like the memory content, like a swap file sort of. Also, you may see two files, RCT and MCT file. The RCT files that they have the information about block changes. So they track the block changes so that when backup software backup the virtual machine hard disk, RCT file tells the backup that only certain blocks are changed. So the software can only back up those blocks which are changed instead of backing up the entire VHDX file. MCT file, it's performed a similar function as RCT, but it provides a host level resiliency. I can show you some of these files. So if I go to, for example, Hyper-1, and as I have some machines on shared storage, so I go to C, cluster storage, volume 1, I can show you two files, server 2, see, this is the virtual machine hard drive. So if I see the properties, It's VHDX. So this is the hard disk file for server 2, and this is the hard disk file for server 3, right? If I go to virtual machines, here are the files which I was talking about, the configuration files. This is the configuration file. Sorry, this is the configuration file VMCX for one of the server. You may say, which one? It's a server. What was that? Is it a server 2 or server 3? Very good question if you're asking this. Because here you don't see a machine name, you see a GUID, right? An ID which is generated by Hyper-V. I will tell you how to see that, but so just for explanation, this is a VMCX file and this is the VMRS file. So VMCX file and VMRS file and their respective folder. You see, VMRS file and VMCX file and the folder related to it. Same thing, VMCX file, VMRX file, same ID and the folder related to it with the same ID. Now, how do I know this belongs to which particular VM? As I say, don't edit VMCX file. So how I would know? Two options. You can either go to the properties for VM, easiest way, and see where you have stored the file, but that could be tricky. Like in this case, I have stored server 2 and server 3 at the same location, right? So I don't know which one is it. So for that, the easiest option is to use PowerShell. If I go to PowerShell, run it as administrator, and I type a command get VM dash computer name, and then because I'm running these VM in a failover cluster, I say get cluster node dash cluster, the name of the cluster node, which is hypercluster one, sorry, which is the name of the cluster group or cluster. Then I pipe the output of that command is format list VM name VM ID. VM ID is that GUID, or calling it GUID, but it's called a VM ID. So if I execute this command, it will show me all the VMs running on this failover cluster. And here I can see VM name, server 3, and VM ID. Server 4, it's VM ID. Server 1, it's VM ID. Server 2, it's VM ID. So if I compare this with this, I can clearly see that this is server 2 VMX file. See? And this is server 3 VMX file. VMCX file, sorry. I'm saying VMX file. I'm just used to few things. So VMCX file. So this is server 2 VMCX file and this server's 3 VMCX file. Okay, so this is it, guys. This is a very important thing. You need to know how to get the VM ID. Again, it's not called GUID, it's called the VM ID. I'm just when I rushed up, I just sometimes screwed up some terminology. Sorry about that. So if you need to know the VM ID, you need to get that information from the PowerShell. So I guess this is it, and I'll see you in next video. Take it easy. Don't forget to subscribe.